Today, as we promised, I'm going to discuss the cross-sections of medulla oblongata. Previously, I discussed the sections of the midbrain at the upper and the lower level, that is at the level of the superior colloculus and the level of the inferior colloculus. Similarly, I also discussed the cross-sections of the pons at the level of the trigeminal nerve and also at the level of the ponto, towards the level of the ponto-medullary junction. So today, the discussion is to do with the medulla oblongata. And so if you want to explain the internal morphology of the medulla oblongata, you have to make about 3 sections. You can make 2, or, for easy understanding, you can make 3 of these sections. One section at what we call the open part of the medulla oblongata, if you look at the posterior part of the brainstem. The second section is what we call section at the sensory decustation. And so the third one is what you call section of the medulla at the level of the pyramidal decustation, which will see the 3 sections. But by and large, these are the 2 sections that I'm going to discuss now, and then later on I'm going to discuss the other section of the medulla oblongata at the level of the pyramidal decustation. So it means that if you want to discuss the medulla oblongata, you have to discuss first and foremost the open part and the closed part. At the closed part, there are 2 sections that you are going to make. Level of these 2 nuclei that we discussed before, carrying this, medial lemniscus and what have you, and that is the level of the sensory decustation, which I will discuss later on. The other one, at the level of the closed part of the medulla, is that of the pyramidal decusation, that is the motor decusation. So we have both sensory and motor decusation, and so at these levels of the medulla, you make sections and then you see the difference between the 2 internal structures, and then you also compare them with the structure of the medulla at the open part of it. So let me just begin the discussion of the medulla oblongata at the level at the open part of that medulla oblongata. You are all aware that I discussed the ventral aspect of the medulla oblongata, where I discussed the pyramids, closer to the midline. And these pyramids, as I said, they contain the corticospinal tracts, those fibers that come from the cerebral hemispheres and what have you. So we have the pyramids lying anteriorly closer to the midline, and on the lateral side of the pyramids, you have the olive, you understand? So the olives, are just, convex swellings by the side of the pyramids, and in each of these, if you go internally, they contain what we call olivary complex, olivary nuclear complex. And so now, if you now go to the lateral most part of the medulla oblongata, you will see also by the side is also convex. And this convexity is as a result of this, the convexity of the tracts that are ascending up, into the cerebellum and what have you. So now let us just start the discussion for the anterior part of, part of the medulla oblongata. So now from the anterior aspect, when you now go into the pyramid, you will see the corticospinal tract that's coming from the cortex, cerebral cortex. So anterior to each of the corticospinal tracts at this open part of the medulla, that's what we call arcuate nuclei. You have one arcuate nucleus lying anterior to this corticospinal tract. On one side, you also have another one on the other side. These arcuate nucleus they form an arc around the descending corticospinal fibers. So what happens is that these arcuate nuclei, the fibers, axons from this nuclei, some of them, they now pass, backward within the medulla oblongata until they get out of the back side of the medulla oblongata to enter into the, flow of the 4th ventricle. So they now form, an arc like that until they now come out of the 4th ventricle. To come out, you understand, until they now come out and enter into one nucleus there that is lying behind, the inferior cerebellar peduncle, which we'll discuss later on. So this nucleus, we call it pontobulbar nucleus. So it enters in there. And so again, some of these fibers from arcuate nucleus of one side, they come out of it until they now lie anterior to the pyramidal tract, or the pyramid, and then it forms an arc like that until it now reach the other, arc like that, so that they finally end into the pontobulbar nucleus, so that it forms a complete arc like this. So this arc that is formed outside from the arcuate nucleus like this is what we call anterior external arcuate fibers. Are you clear? We call these fibers that emanate from each of these arcuate lines from inside. They come out and lie anterior to the pyramid and the olive until they now reach the pontobulbar nucleus. These fibers are what we call anterior external arcuate fibers. So we have now seen this. So these fibers, as they go, some of these fibers, as they go inside the medulla, they now pass back at the backside of the medulla oblongata into the fourth ventricle at the floor of it, and they come out. So these fibers here, they form what we call medullary striae. So we call it what? Medullary striae at the back of the medulla oblongata. So we call it what? Medullary striae. So we have seen this. So now just but posterior lateral to each of these corticospinal fibers, you have this olivary complex. This olivary complex is made up of 3 groups of nuclei. The first one, which is very important and very big, is what we call inferior olivary nucleus, what we call principal olivary nucleus, or you call it inferior olivary nucleus. Are you clear? So this inferior olivary nucleus, just anterior and medial to it, you have what we call medial accessory olivary nucleus. So you have medial accessory olivary nucleus that is lying anterior and medial to the inferior olivary nucleus or the principal olivary nucleus. And then behind it, you have another nucleus that is lying dorsal to it. And that is what we call dorsal accessory olivary nucleus. The 3 together, they form this what we call inferior olivary complex. You get my point? So that means since we have this inferior olivary complex, definitely there has to be superior olivary complex. The superior olivary complex, actually, I didn't discuss it in the pons because it is not seen. When you now cut a cross section of the pons at the level of where the trapezoid body is formed. So, the trapezoid body is formed by the, crossing fibers of the cochlear nuclei from the ventral and the dorsal. Are you clear? Before they ascend up to form the lateral lemniscus. Are you clear? Lemniscus, one on either side. So within the trapezoid body, so superior olivary complex, they are scattered along the trapezoid. So you may not likely see them when you make the cross section of the pons at that level. You get it? Although there are some of this part of this superior olivary nucleus complex that are lying dorsal to the trapezoid body. And so this superior olivary complex is responsible for auditory, auditory responses. So perception of sound, that is the responsibility of the superior olivary complex. While the inferior olivary complex is responsible for this olivocerebellar, olivocerebellar pathway, whereby fibers from either of these nuclei, whether from the principal nucleus or from the medial or from the dorsal, these fibers, they now enter into the cerebellum through the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Are you clear? So that they are responsible for what we call motor learning. Because cerebellum, when we discuss the cerebellum, you will see the functions of the cerebellum. So these fibers coming from this, complex, they now pass into the cerebellum as olivocerebellar tract. They pass through the inferior cerebellar peduncle, and so they are responsible for motor learning and what have you. So now we've seen this inferior olivary nucleus complex. So just by the side of the midline, you all remember our, longitudinally placed tracts that we've discussed before while we were discussing the sections of either the midbrain or the pons. So we have our medial lemniscus, you get it? We also have our, tactospinal tract, and then we also have our medial longitudinal fasciculus. We all discuss the functions of those ones. So if you now go behind this medial longitudinal fasciculus, at the back side of this part of the inner aspect of the medulla oblongata, anterior to the fourth ventricle, there are 3 sets of nuclei that are organized from medial to lateral. Are you clear? So the most medial nucleus here is what we call the hypoglossal nucleus. So the hypoglossal nucleus lies anterior to the floor of the fourth ventricle. And so this hypoglossal nucleus now, its own fibers come out like this from it. If you can remember, I said that the hypoglossal nerve exits between the olive, if you can remember, we said that we have what we call anterior lateral sulcus, and we also have posterior lateral sulcus, with regard to the anterior surface of the brainstem at the level of the medulla there. So the hypoglossal nerve comes out of this, posterior lateral sulcus, anterior, not posterior. So it comes out of the anterior, not posterior. It comes out from the anterolateral sulcus like this, and so it goes out like that. So this is our hypoglossal nerve. So this hypoglossal nerve supplies the muscles of the tongue. We have already discussed that. So it goes there to supply the tongue. So the next nucleus is what we call dorsal motor nucleus. This dorsal motor nucleus, connects with 2 cranial nerves. One, the glossopharyngeal nerve. The other one is the vagus nerve. Are you clear? So this dorsal motor nucleus is for both glossopharyngeal nerve, which is the 9th cranial nerve, and the other one is, it also connects with the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve. We'll see how they connect. So the most lateral part of this 3 set of nuclei lying anterior to the floor of the fourth ventricle is what we call the medial vestibular nucleus. If you can remember, while I was discussing the lower aspect of the pons, I discussed the vestibular nuclear complex. If you can remember, that vestibular nuclear complex, we said that we have the superior vestibular nucleus, we have the medial vestibular nucleus, and then we have the lateral vestibular nucleus, and then we also have the inferior vestibular nucleus. If you can remember, I said that the inferior one, you cannot see it when you section the lower aspect of the pons. Are you clear? So the inferior vestibular nucleus can vividly be seen at the upper part of the medulla oblongata. Are you clear? So the reason why you are seeing this medial vestibular nucleus is because this medial vestibular nucleus is very large. Some portion of it is in the lower part of the pons, while the remaining portion of it is in the upper part of the medulla oblongata. And that is why when you make that section, what you are going to see, you're only going to see these 2 complexes here. You will see the lateral and the part of the medial vestibular nucleus. Are you clear? So that is why you are going to see this medial vestibular nucleus, and then you see this inferior vestibular nucleus. So there are also 2 nuclei that are lying in relation to the anterior lateral aspect of the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus. Are you clear? So these 2 nuclei, one medial is what we call the nucleus ambiguous. Are you clear? So the nucleus ambiguous is also part of the nucleus that connects with the vagus nerve. Are you clear? And we also have what you call the inferior salivatory nucleus. If you can remember before, we also discussed the superior salivatory nucleus that we say is parasympathetic, responsible for the secretomotor function of the nasal mucosal glands, lacrimal gland, the palatine glands, and the sublingual and submandibular. So the inferior salivatory nucleus is also parasympathetic to the parotid gland. So it's only gland that is, related to this inferior salivatory nucleus. Are you clear? So now, when we now look at another, just behind the inferior celebratory nucleus, we are also going to see our nucleus obstructus solitarius. Are you clear? This nucleus obstructus solitarius also connects with the vagus nerve. You get my point? And also with glossopharyngeal nerve. Are you clear? So we'll see how these nerves connect. So if we want to, connect the glossopharyngeal nerve, for example, so we have to now take, number one, the dorsal motor nucleus, which is this one. Are you clear? So it comes out of the posterior lateral sulcus. Are you clear? So we have the dorsal motor nucleus, and then we also have the nucleus ambiguus, which is this one. So it connects with that. And so we also have from the nucleus obstructus solitarius, which is responsible for carrying taste sensation from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, if you can remember. So that is the function of the nucleus obstructus solitarius, carrying sensation of taste. Are you clear? If it is true, the facial nerve, we discussed that already. Okay? So now we've seen that. The vagus, the glossopharyngeal nerve is here coming out. So this is our ninth cranial nerve. So for the vagus nerve, we have, remember, when you now look at the anterior aspect of the brainstem at the level of the medulla there, you are going to see that the hypoglossal nerve is most medial, right? Since it is from the anterior lateral sulcus. So on the posterior lateral sulcus, we have our glossopharyngeal nerve exitum first, then followed by our vagus nerve, and then below is accessory nerve. I hope you remember that. So that is why you see I've started bringing this glossopharyngeal nerve out first. You get it? And so for the vagus nerve, you now have to, I can use the same marker. So you get, it takes origin from the dorsal motor nucleus and also from the nucleus ambiguus. Are you clear? Also from the nucleus obstructus solitarius. You get it? So it exits. And also some part of the trigeminal tract and nucleus. You get it? If you can remember, that subspinal trigeminal nerve nucleus and tract also contributed to the facial nerve, if you can remember. So the same thing here. For this, it also contributes to the formation of the vagus. So you have about 4 nuclei. You get it? We have the dorsal motor nucleus. We have the nucleus ambiguus. You have the nucleus obstructus solitarius. And then we also have the nucleus and tract of the spinal trigeminal nerve. You get it? So the nerve exits out there. So this is our 10th cranial nerve. Are you clear? So now by the lateral side of these 2 nerves that exit now, we have our trigeminal, spinal trigeminal nerve nucleus and tract lying just lateral to the inferior cerebellar peduncle. If you can remember, we said that the medulla is being connected to the cerebellum by the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Are you clear? So this is the inferior cerebellar peduncle here. And so if you can remember, we also discussed about the dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei. So this dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei begin from the medulla oblongata, and then they ascend up through the pons before they finally connect and form the trapezoid body, and then they finally ascend to form the lemnisci we have talked before. So now we have seen all this, our internal structure of the medulla oblongata at the level of open part of it. So just lying anterior to it, you will only be able to see, anterior to the inferior cerebellar peduncle, you will only be able to see the ventral spinocerebellar tract. When we do the cross-section of the spinal cord, you will see that there are some fibers, emanating from the spinal cord, what you call anterior or ventral, as well as dorsal or posterior spinocerebellar tracts. This anterior or posterior spinocerebellar tracts, they are responsible for, carrying information of unconscious proprioception from the lower limbs, trunk, and upper limbs. Are you clear? Also, the upper limb unconscious proprioceptive information is from what we call craniocerebellar tract. And that craniocerebellar tract is part of the accessory nucleus of the nucleus cuneatus, which we'll discuss later on. So by the side of the nucleus cuneatus, at the border of the closed part of the medulla oblongata, we have an accessory nucleus there, what we call accessory cuneate nucleus. So that accessory cuneate nucleus connects with the cerebellum to form what we call craniocerebellar tract. And this is responsible for carrying unconscious proprioceptive information from the upper limb. Are you clear? While the anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tract, they carry unconscious proprioceptive information from the lower limb and trunk, with the exception of the upper limb. Are you clear? So that is what what you people are supposed to know. So what I want to also emphasize is that some of these fibers from the arcuate nucleus that I discussed before, they also crisscross anteriorly here. Are you clear? So some of the fibers, as they come out, they go to the arcuate nucleus of the other side, while some they also come out from that opposite arcuate nucleus to the opposite arcuate nucleus. So there is a crisscrossing, decussation of the arcuate fibers. Are you clear? So we have now seen that all other sections that we've discussed before can be seen there. So the next section that I'm going to discuss is this section of the medulla oblongata at the level of sensory decussation. But before we go to that, let us just have a break in case we have any questions so we can discuss.